Am I opening, or can I say good evening? I'm so and so. This is what's
Teacher.
So they will be live on the show on Inside already. Before they come to me, they'll be live Inside already. Are you saying that? They come to me and then I link it to Inside. Okay. Okay, cool.
Of the University of South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, we request you to join us in silent prayer or meditation to give thanks for the achievements being celebrated on this occasion. Thank you. We may be seated. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
Well, I can tell you that my colleagues have responded for the simple reason that they know that unless I have a response, I'm unlikely to proceed until such time that I get a response. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you so much. I just want to invite all of us as we're gathered here tonight to remember that the first part of this program is a graduation ceremony, which of course will be followed by a lecture. So, as we all should be knowing, that graduation ceremonies have their own unique kind of attraction and interest. This is a time when we celebrate. And it is for that reason why it will be necessary for me to invite all of you as we are gathered here tonight to remember that that's partly what this ceremony is about. So I do know that we are all very excited about the opportunity that we have, but let me hasten to say that as a university, we are the ones who are more excited than anyone else. This is informed by an understanding of the profound impact that this ceremony means for the university. We have an association with the Steve Biko Foundation as a university. That's a formal one where we have a collaboration agreement with them. And we annually have events that we host together. And I can tell you that with all these events, we've never, ever begun to understand what it means in terms of the impact that this has for the community, not only in this country, but our entire region, that is our continent, and across the globe. As we all know and appreciate the leadership that was provided by the late Stephen Biko, and the ideals that he lived and died for, that we all need to remember, because it is only that which will assist us to come closer to terms with what it means to be human, with what it means to regain your being, with what it means to relive that which is supposed to have been an original mark of a human being, who have, over the years, been dismembered, disorganized, divided, and suddenly found themselves living as simple pieces in the environment without any sense of community, without any sense of belonging, without any sense of having any proximity to any other. That's the level at which dehumanization over the years has succeeded to do in the people of this country. And we all know that the late Stephen Biko had this clear idea of seeing a nation that will in fact be a nation that will be united not only on the basis of being part of the human race, but united also in spirit, united in practice, united in interests, and united in the understanding of the appreciation of the environment in which we find ourselves. It is particularly these reasons that this university appreciated, and its council saw it fit, that this is the caliber of a leader that deserves the recognition by the University of South Africa. And on the 14th of September this year, the Council of the University of South Africa resolved that Bantu Stephen Biko will be honored by this university to be awarded an honorary doctoral degree in health studies. This is what is going to be happening tonight. So I just want, before we can proceed, to recognize the family of the late Bantu Stephen Biko, his wife, Mrs. Steve Biko, who's with us here tonight, his children, Mr. Biko, Mr. Samora Biko, our dignitaries who are with us here tonight, members of our diplomatic corps, all the members of our council, and yourselves as our distinguished guests this evening. If I can begin to identify all of you by name, I can tell you that I can talk until cows come home. So without then having to move in that direction, I would rather like to be short and say we're looking forward beyond the graduation ceremony to hear our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Ibbo Mandaza, who will be speaking to us, and we're looking forward to that. And I also want to welcome in our midst our colleagues, the leadership of the university, the vice principals, the deans, the executive directors who have joined us in this celebration. And I would like to say to them that what you've done, I will actually be marking in my book so that I can remember you at the time when it matters, that you remembered me as well at the time when it mattered. So please remind me if I forget and say this Vice Chancellor doesn't care. But I also want to thank the members of our own administrative staff who have acquitted themselves excellently in preparing this place and for ensuring that as and when you come in, the place should be ready for this ceremony. So we need to thank them. That work is recognized by ourselves as a university. And I also want to thank the students who have joined us tonight, as well as the community at large, because we do know that this is broadcast in the country, in the region, and everywhere else where people are accessing our signal. So we want to greet them as well, because they are part and parcel of this event. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say at this point that the ceremony is going to proceed in this manner, that Mr. Samora Biko, the son, is the one who will be receiving this honorary doctorate, because he'll be doing so on behalf of the late Bantu Stephen Biko, because the degree is awarded posthumously. And I also want to mention that the CEO and the chairman of the foundation, Mr. Biko, is the one who will then be presenting the acceptance address, so that at least we are aware of who will be coming forward. So all that remains then from my side is to say that let us all sit back, relax, and enjoy the graduation ceremony, because we have now started in earnest. Thank you so much. At this point, gentlemen, I'll be requesting our executive dean, Professor Andrew Phillips to then walk to the podium and do what we expect him to do. Thank you so much.
Mr. Vice Chancellor, Mr. Samora Biko, the son of the late Mr. Steve Biko, will receive the honorary degree on his behalf. I now request Mr. Samora Biko to rise. It is generally accepted that when institutions bestow honors on individuals in recognition of their contribution to society, it is these individuals who are usually grateful for such honors and recognition. It happens only on the rarest of occasions that it is the institution bestowing the honor that feels humbled by the acceptance of such an honor by the individual concerned, or those receiving the honor on his or her behalf. One such occasion is the acceptance by the Biko family and the Steve Biko Foundation for the University of South Africa to confer an honorary doctoral degree on the late Bantu Stephen Biko. The name Steve Biko is synonymous with the history of the struggle for the liberation of South Africa. No narrative about the road traversed by the people of South Africa towards the eventual attainment of democracy in 1994 can be said to be complete without mention of the pivotal role played by the gallant son of the soil, particularly at the height of apartheid and at the time when the brutality of the regime knew no bounds. Aptly referred to as the father of Black consciousness, Steve Biko was at the forefront of a movement in the 1970s that sought not only to dismantle the apartheid system, but religiously advocated for the mental emancipation of the Black man and woman and encouraged them to become the architects of their own future. Biko was also at the forefront of the student movement of the 1970s, which fought gallantly and fearlessly against the repressive regime of the time, seeking to bring about equality, fairness, and justice in the South African schooling system. In addition to the student movement, Steve Biko played a pivotal role on the broader socio-political frontier, including the formation of a political structure that tackled issues beyond student affairs, the Black People's Convention. At a community level, development level, his immense contribution to the betterment of the lives of the marginalized community of Ginsburg in King Williamstown is well documented. The Zanepilo Clinic and Creche, the founding of the Zimele Trust Fund to assist political prisoners and their families, and the Ginsburg Trust to assist Black students are testimony to his indestructible pride and loyalty to his community. Biko undoubtedly led from the front. He was a great thinker and prolific writer as well. His thoughts on socioeconomic issues, captured in publications such as the Black Review, the Black Viewpoint, which he edited and published in 1972, his analytic articles written under the nom de plume of Frank Talk, as well as the epic book, I Write What I Like, are timeless. They have left an enduring legacy of Black consciousness and thought leadership that have proven to be instructive and a point of reference to students and scholars locally and internationally. long after he met his untimely and brutal demise on 12 September 1977 at the hands of those perpetuating a system denounced by the international community as a crime against humanity. Biko's life and times and his contribution to the creation of a better society are the stuff of legends. His influence transcends psychological, political, social, and physical boundaries. In death, as he did in life, he continues to shape, inform, motivate, and inspire generations of crusaders for justice in South Africa, Africa, and the diaspora. Although widely regarded as the father of Black consciousness and the leading human rights and political activist, it is the leading role in the formation of community-based structures such as the Zenampilo Clinic and Creche that demonstrated his dedication and commitment to public health and the general well-being of the marginalized communities. It is therefore, Vice-Chancellor, a singular honor to recommend that the degree of Doctor of Literature and Philosophy, honoris causa, be conferred on Bantu Stephen Biko in recognition of his sterling contribution to the cause of human rights and public health in marginalized communities. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, I now have the honor to request you to confer on Bantu Stephen Biko the degree of Doctor of Literature and Philosophy, honoris causa, posthumously.
I confer the degree of Doctor of Literature and Philosophy, honoris causa, on Bantu Stephen Biko, posthumously. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend our gratitude to Mr. Samora Biko for having received this honorary degree on behalf of the Father. And at this point, it is my honor to invite the chairperson of the Steve Biko Foundation, Mr. Nkosinathi Biko, to present the acceptance speech.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. In his absence, I'd like to acknowledge the Chancellor, the Honorable Thabo Mbeki, the Chairman of Council, Mr. Simelane, members of Council, Vice Chancellor Professor Makanya, the President of the SRC, our honored guest and speaker, Dr. Ibbo Mandaza. I would also like to acknowledge my brother and friend, Dr. Figeni. We are infinitely indebted for your excellent custodianship of the partnership between our institutions. And in mentioning you, I'd also like to acknowledge my colleague at the foundation, Mr. Bruce Waters. In Ginsberg, they call him Umlungu Wakabiko. We call him Ukamela. The originators and stalwarts of the Black Consciousness Movement present here, and I've seen a couple. I saw Professor Nengwekulu, Ambassador Mtinzo, I saw Mrs. Mpumlwana, I saw Dr. Kenny Rashidi, Meg Gumbi, and there are many others that I will hopefully meet as the program continues. I also acknowledge the President of AZAPO, Comrade Strike, together with the Secretary General of AZAPO, the members of the diplomatic community, the media and business, the political leadership present, as well as patrons of the Steve Biko Memorial Lecture who are here and those who join us via the live broadcast or on SABC, the live streaming. I want to acknowledge those who are gathered in Bahia, in Brazil, under the emblem of the Steve Biko Cultural Institute based there. I'd like to acknowledge comrades, towers, chiefs, fighters. I don't know what they say in the DA, but I'm sure they are covered with friends, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Biko family led by Mrs. Biko, and of the board of the Steve Biko Foundation led by my chairman, Mr. Mkabela, it gives us great pleasure to welcome you all to the 18th Steve Biko Memorial Lecture. On this special occasion, my brother Samora earlier led the family in accepting the honorary degree of Doctor of Literature and Philosophy, bestowed posthumously on the late Bantu Steve Biko. The award is in recognition of his contribution to the advancement of human rights and public health in marginalized communities. There could be no more striking a physical resemblance of our father than in Samora. And this is true, at least for the period before my mother's culinary excellence deposited her affection on our father's waistline. And suddenly there was more of him to love. Despite the many awards that he has received in many places around the world, it remains forever moving when such recognition comes from home. And today, in addition to being at home at an African university in South Africa, there are other reasons why this gathering is rather special. The first reason is that a stone's throw from here, across the hill that lies to my back, is the Kgosi Mampuru Maximum Security Prison. Once known as the Pretoria Maximum Security Prison, it is at this place of captivity that Biko's soul escaped to bid us the ultimate farewell, a victim of torture and death in detention. The Xhosa people have an expression that is born out of years of observing the behavior of that hallowed beast, the cow. When one cow in the herd dies, the rest of the cattle exhibit a strange behavior. They gather at the place of death of the fallen beast and they wail. What is odd about this behavior is that even when the carcass of the dead has been removed, even if they didn't experience or witness the actual killing, they assemble at that very spot in anguish and they wail. And sometimes so deep is their anguish that they reach out to scratch the soil on that spot with their forelegs, as if to say, right here lies the very source of my pain. This behavior is the origin of the Xhosa expression, ukuqwala emswaneni, wailing at the place of disembowelment. Thus, like cattle that gather at the site of the fallen, so do we at this venue every year within a stretch of the arm of Biko's deathbed. But unlike cattle that bellow in pain, we gather in celebration to give a symbolic, if triumphant, kiss to his spirit. We do so in the hope that this moment on our national calendar shall have a resuscitative effect on us, the living. The second reason that this gathering is special is to be found in the archives at the Steve Biko Center. And I spent the past couple of days examining the family archives, going through documents, some of which are as old as 100 years. These documents provide two narratives that I'd like to share. The first is that death has twice robbed members of the Biko family who were within reach of qualifying through this institution. My grandfather, Matthew Mzingaye Biko, was a student at this institution 70 years ago. Having matriculated from Mount Arthur Higher Mission School in Glengrey in 1946, he registered for a BA degree a few months after the birth of Steve Biko. His results, dated the 11th of April 1948, show that in that year he had taken and passed English, Roman Dutch law, South African criminal law, and native law. He died in 1950, it would appear shortly before completing his studies with UNISA. Steve Biko was 4 years at the time. The second narrative is that these documents provide a good sense of the difficult condition under which Steve Biko studied at this institution. On the 26th of February 1973, Biko, along with many of his colleagues, and many of them here, were issued with a banning order in terms of Section 9 and 10 of the Suppression of Communism Act. And it read as follows: whereas I, Petrus Cornelius Pelser, Minister of Justice, am satisfied that you engage in activities which are furthering or are calculated to further the achievement of any of the objects of communism, I hereby, in terms of Sections 9 and 10 of the Act, prohibit you from, for a period commencing on the date on which this notice is delivered and expiring on the 28th of February 1978, it was a 5-year ban, from attending within the Republic of South Africa or the territory of Southwest Africa. And the citations in terms of Section 9 were any social gathering, any political gathering, and any gathering of pupils or students assembled for the purpose of being instructed, trained, or addressed by you. I'm sure many of the elders here will know this off by heart. In terms of Section 10, that banning order read as follows: you are prohibited from absenting yourself from the magisterial district of King Williamstown, being a resident of any area other than Ginsberg, being within a factory, premises of a publication or organization, communicating with persons whose names appear on any list contemplated in the Act, which included the banned list, taking part in activities of organizations contemplated in the Act, and more specifically, SASO and the Black People's Convention. And this one is a funny one: receiving at your residence any visitor other than a medical doctor or your mother, Mrs. Alice Biko. These are some from a total of 12 pages of restrictions that were served on Biko, and his colleagues were similarly restricted. And the strategy was to dismantle this hub of political activism and to post its members to the most remote of South Africa's communities, subjecting them to conditions designed to incapacitate the movement and to imprison the members, because it was easy to break the orders. The alternative was, of course, to waste their minds in idleness and thereby push them to the brink of wanton self-destruction. Now, in the archives, there's also a tacit admission by the state that they knew exactly what they were doing to this lot. And so on the 20th of March, 1973, a month after his banning, Steve Biko receives the following letter from the Secretary of Justice, Meneer Oberholzer. Sir, and the title is Payment of Allowance in Terms of Section 10, number 2 of the Act. An allowance of 25 Rand per month, with effect from 30th March 1973, will be paid to you by the Magistrate of King Williamstown for the duration of your restriction to the Magisterial District of King Williamstown. To which Biko replied a month earlier, Dear Sir, please inform the department that I have no use for your messy wage, which to me is more of an insult than anything else. Yours faithfully, B.S. Biko. Steve Biko was previously a medical student at the University of Natal until his expulsion. And in hindsight, it appears that the one condition that sent him here was in Section 10, and it read as follows: you are prohibited from being at a place or area which constitutes the premises on which any public or private university, university college, school, or other educational institution is situated. So in other words, he could study all he wants for as long as he never set foot on a campus of any kind, including library facilities. And thus, following this banning order, he began a relationship with UNISA, registering for a BProc degree under those conditions. There are a number of other letters that he wrote, which I will not go into, such as negotiating for the relief from these banning conditions and so forth. Irrespective of what happened, by the 18th of March 1977, he was in a position to submit the following letter of registration for his third year, registering for private law, mercantile law, civil procedure, criminal procedure, and interpretation of statutes. And he addressed this letter to the registrar. Dear Sir, please find enclosed completed registration form and a check of 72 Rand towards my school fees. I already have a credit of 50 Rand in my account. I suspect, Vice Chancellor, that this was evidently before #FeesMustFall. The end of the academic relationship with UNISA came abruptly with his murder in September 1997. It's recorded in the following correspondence from the registrar. I have to inform you, this is addressed to the family, that the late Mr. Biko was a registered student at this university for the 1997 academic year. It is policy to refund a percentage of the fee in respect of a deceased student who passed before the commencing date of the examination. You are kindly requested to furnish by return of post the name of the executor and so forth. It goes. And the record shows that UNISA kindly returned to his estate an amount of 87 Rand and 10 cents, being the refund for part tuition for that year. And this was done through Sean Chatty, the legal representative. So this institution fulfilled its obligations to Steve Biko in 1977. And today, 40 years later, it has elected once more to reopen his file and to celebrate Steve Biko. I will not go into the reasons because they are well documented in the citation, and some will be referenced in the lecture by Dr. Ibbo Mandaza, titled 40-Year Journey, Pan-Africanism, Class, and the State in Southern Africa. I want to conclude by pointing to the significance of this event. Degrees should always be acquired by one or both of the two methods available to us. One is by examination, the other is honoris causa, which means for the sake of honor. The one appraisal recognizes how we apply ourselves in the classroom. The other recognizes how we apply ourselves in the world in which we live. The one measures academic success, the other measures significance. Unfortunately, his untimely murder prevented us from celebrating his academic excellence. However, his purposeful life presents us with the opportunity to celebrate the latter. Now, given the proliferation of fake degrees out there, we must reclaim the place of rigor and of honor in our society. Earlier, I said that behind me lies a hill, and beyond it, a prison. Perched on the crest of that hill is a place called Freedom Park, a symbol of our people's hope. Kgosi Mampuru is literally at the foot of that very hill. The physical positioning of these two facilities is an apt analogy. Indeed, the foundation of our freedom is the tremendous sacrifice of our people. Thus, this valley, this city, should constantly remind the custodians of our future of the ultimate cost of freedom. This is what we meant when we sang the song, Siyaya Epitol, O Siyaya Epitol, O Siyaya Siyoinyo, Songena Sabalaza, Tina Songena Schubuluza, Songena Schubuluza. We will march in on our knees fighting for our struggle. Not Songena Sihuipiliza. Which means we will take it all, and take it at all costs. Across to my left is another hill, home to that majestic building that once was the office of the Chancellor of this university. On paper, that hill is a center of the people's power. It ought to beam across our nation the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. It ought to perpetuate the hopes of our people. But given the current state of national anxiety, ought we not assume that in the Chancellor's hasty exit, in obedience to the ambush by his very people, someone may have unwittingly turned off the lights? For what seems to have ensued is an era of increasing fumbling in rapidly decreasing light. Someone may have misplaced the operating manual, the baton that is molded out of the teachings of the founders of our democracy. That missing manual contains a page from the life of Steve Biko, a life that teaches us that even in captivity, we still have the capacity to remain people of honor. As he cautioned us, material want alone is bad enough, but coupled with spiritual poverty, it kills. We cannot be recipients of mercy wages, nor can we render ourselves mercenaries to causes that violate the dignity of our people. We should not ever succumb to capture. Sobukwe's script in that manual was written in 1949, when as president of the SRC at Fort Hare, he reminded us, and I quote, that we must fight for freedom, the right to call our souls our own. The price of freedom, he said, is blood, toil, and tears. The consolation, however, is that Africa never forgets. The Biko family accepts this honor with great humility as a recognition of Bantu Stephen Biko and in remembrance of his father, Matthew Mzingaya Biko. Thank you, Vice Chancellor, and thank you, Africa, for remembering.
Ladies and gentlemen, we may now be seated. I do hope that each and every one of us has succeeded to follow what we've heard, that we didn't simply just hear, but we also accepted what we had. And beyond that we shall be internalizing it. Because it will do us so much good to understand, because that is what seems to be lacking in our society, which comes at a huge cost, which we can all ill afford. It is what we've had that will sustain us and will guarantee that we have a future, as we say as Africans, the future we want. Mr. Biko, thank you once more. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to extend our gratitude to Mr. Biko, the Biko family, Mr. Samora Biko, who received the Honorary Doctorate, the chairman of the Steve Biko Foundation, Mr. Mkabela, our mother, Mrs. Biko, the wife of Mr. Nkosinathi Biko, Mrs. Biko is with us here tonight, our ambassador, Mam Tinsu, Mam Pumluana, Advocate Kumbi, Prof. Nengwekulu, and all those who worked with the late Bantu Stephen Biko. I'm doing this on behalf of the Chancellor of this university, the chairperson of our council, our senate, our students and alumni, when I say thank you. Can we have another round of applause, please? Ladies and gentlemen, by the virtue of the powers entrusted to me, I now dissolve this congregation of the University of South Africa.
Pula! Sifikile Pitoli. Zoluman vutela ngicela uNkosinathi. Zopheka ngisophula ngicela injoli. Zokofa nibhaka ngicela umolayazana. Alitshani lingena ndaba. Inkosi mazidambi izicaka zivumile bantu bakuthi. Dr. Mandaza, welcome to the production ground of world leaders. Welcome to the Center of African Excellency. Welcome to the University of Africa. Africa rise. Kinako ma Africa. Skaba hemisa mntu omnyama vukuzenzele. Kunika abafundi nani zifundiswa. Bizana umlisa nomthinjana. Bizana imilowo nemilonde. Bizana malume nomalumekazi. Bizana dade nodabawo. Bizana abancinci nabadala. Bizana ityakalani. Namhlanje yiminyaka ngama-40. Unyana kanokuzolo qaqambileyo wanabela uqaqaqa. Inhliziyo zethu selihlwile isizwe. Ilanga latshona emini esizweni. Namhlanje sizibuza imibuzo esingenoyiphendula. Sisithi xa bukhona wena ngekunjani na? Namhlanje izinto azimteka ngqika. Ikati lelaziko. Imisebenzi dololo. Yolonto ndisithi kakunamhlanje. Phakamana maqandeni lutsha laseMzantsi Afrika. Amathambo katatakho Nkosinathi makashukume namhlanje. Nkosi sikeleli Afrika. Nkosi sikeleli Afrika. Ndlova isindwa ngumboko wayo. Sithi kakunamhlanje kulungile sizwe. Kulungile ma-Afrika. Kulungile bantwana beqhubo somthuthu somthonyama. Long live the spirit of compassion, long live. Simbanga senyoka kwele mtini asuka chikimbungi yale yilo. Long live the spirit of black consciousness, long live. Long live the spirit of Steve Biko, long live. Manya manya ya jana mponeni mpoki. Yo!
Thank you very much. Now we change the gear as we get into the memorial lecture, the third one at UNISA and the 18th lecture overall. Without any waste of time, I will now be moving into that program, and there'll be a bit of reshuffling as we have become familiar with that. And it normally takes place around this time of the day. Yes. So I'm going to do that nocturnal reshuffling in a sense. The spirit of Steve Biko is reverberating in this place. When Kosnati spoke, you'd only be a person with a heart of stone not to be moved. More so when he was concluding, because the grammar of today has changed. Samora Machel popularized the words aluta continua. But today the new grammar is luta continue. And as my dean was saying, he penned that famous book, I Write What I Like. But today, to paraphrase Zapiro, we say, I grab what I like. So, without any waste of time, I'm going to call upon our Vice Chancellor, Professor Mandla Makanya, to give his welcome address. Let's put our hands together for him.
Thank you so much, Dr. Figeni, our program director. And just to thank everyone else who's gathered with us here tonight. I will be speaking, but before doing that, to apologize on behalf of the Chancellor of the University, who couldn't be with us here tonight, and also the Chairperson of Council, who unfortunately also took ill and could not be here, having committed himself to be part and parcel of these proceedings. So let me then, Program Director, welcome every member who's gathered with us here in the audience, starting with the Biko family, with a particular mention of Mrs. Ntsiki Biko and the children, as well as all the relatives that are gathered here tonight, the founder and executive trustee of the Steve Biko Foundation, Mr. Nkosinathi Biko, the executive team accompanied by his wife, the chairperson of the Board of Trustees of the Steve Biko Foundation, Mr. Mkabela, members of our council who are gathered with us here tonight in their numbers, Mrs. Mandu Makanya, executive management of the university, our keynote speaker and distinguished scholar, Dr. Ibbo Mandaza, panelists and contemporaries of the late Steve Biko, Mam Togombomluan, Prof. Erinangwekulu, our Honorable Ambassador, Mam Tenji Wemtinso, and all the contemporaries of the late Steve Biko, leaders and representatives of the public sector, business, labor, civil society, and political formations. I also want to recognize the members of our own government, because we have the information that we have deputy ministers who are with us here tonight, members of the ecclesiastical community, academic and administrative staff of UNISA and its alumni, president of the National Student Representative Council and your team, leaders of our regional SFCs, student leaders from our neighboring universities, distinguished audience who are gathered here tonight, and those viewing or listening through the broadcast of this event. Ladies and gentlemen, and all protocols observed, good evening. It is with a deep sense of honor and pleasure that I have to welcome all of you to this historic memorial event. Tonight, we will bear witness to two seminal events, the one that we've just observed, that is the graduation ceremony, but also this glorious occasion that we are now transitioning to. This is, of course, an opportunity for all of us to be treated to the wonderful annual Steve Biko Memorial Lecture. This is an opportunity tonight for us to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the leader of the people of our country, who, as we know, was not shared with us, had his demise at the hands of the apartheid security forces in the now Hosimamburo prison, which is just around the corner from here. Also important to note is that Steve Biko will have turned 70 this year, hence the theme of tonight's event, Biko 70-40, inspiration beyond a lifetime. This is an important milestone for South Africa, for Africa and the world, given the liberation heritage and the legacy this towering giant of our liberation struggle has bequeathed us. As we celebrate the lives of our liberation icons, we often forget that they were also members of families and lineages or kinship groups. Biko was not only a struggle icon, he was a father, he was a husband, he was a sibling, he was a relative, and he was a member of our community. We therefore salute and pay tribute to the Biko family. In particular, we recognize Mrs. Ntsiki Biko. Mama, Mama, you had to endure the public and private pains and suffering before and after Steve Biko died, and yet you have preserved his legacy with such dignity and passion. As we stand in the symbolic shadow of this intellectual giant and bask in the glory of a purposeful life, not lived in vain, please know that we recognize, we acknowledge, and we salute the role that you and the Biko family played in crafting his legacy. I would like to thank the Steve Biko Foundation for a vibrant and mutually reinforcing and beneficial partnership that has yielded such tangible results in the space of few years. Having hosted former Mozambican President George Kim's Chisano, as well as a global struggle icon, Professor Angela Davis, Today, this event adds to that illustrious company. We are poised for yet another great treatment experience. When I signed the Memorandum of Understanding with the Steve Biko Foundation, I never anticipated that this relationship will have yielded so many positive benefits that speak to our core business and strategic goals in such a short space of time. We are, in fact, committed to ensuring that this partnership grows and expands its footprint and it impacts as we jointly embark on a quest for social justice, empowerment, and intellectual excellence. Our university's core mandate is teaching and learning, research and innovation, and community engagement, and we find many synergies with the Steve Biko Foundation in that regard. In fact, Steve Biko himself embodied in a supremely fundamental and impactful way the aforementioned areas in his work and advocacy. Other partner institutions could learn a lot from this partnership, which is assuming an ever higher value and impact in our society. Fellow South Africans, African brothers and sisters, and people of goodwill from all over the world, as we gather here tonight, the South Africa and higher education sector is at a crossroads, facing a myriad of social, economic, and political challenges. Political and policy decisions taken this year and even soon after the end of the year will have a profound catalytic impact that will either cast a light or shadow for decades to come. We certainly are not where we were at the dawn of our democracy and independence in 1994. But more significantly, we are not where we intended to be. We have not seen the great promise of a liberated, just, prosperous, and non-racial society. At times like these, we seek wisdom and draw inspiration from sages such as Steve Biko, when he predicted that in time, we shall be in a position to bestow on South Africa the greatest possible gift, a more humane face. Those were his words. That promised land, despite a promising start, is being squandered on a daily basis as we've taken a detour, defaulting from our promissory note to the downtrodden masses. As we seek wisdom from our worthy ancestors, such as Steve Biko, in our effort to return to the road to social justice, we should and we must visit his works for wise counsel. Public universities have experienced much turbulence in the last 2.5 years as students demand free and transformed or decolonized education. This reminds us of a young Steve Biko, then a medical student at the then Natal University, which is now the University of KwaZulu-Natal, who ignited and led Black students' revolt against white liberal tolerance for racial discrimination in all disguised or overt forms. Biko and his cohort of leaders developed well-contemplated, conceptualized, and refined sets of ideas, theories, philosophy, and ideology from their invidious context, and they shaped and defined the alternative society to which they aspired. It is my humble submission that the current generation of student leaders or managers and academics in the university, having understood the demands that informed what must fall, should engage each other in a robust, mutually respectful, and honest conversation to define what must rise in place of that which ought to fall, which by definition, that which must rise is the decolonized higher education. In this manner, we shall be worthy inheritors or heirs of Steve Biko's legacy as we seek answers together, talking with each other, not past each other, not at each other, This will be a truly redemptive discourse, mindful of the challenges our students and those at the bottom of the socio-economic ladder have to contend with on a daily basis. As we embark on the genuine transformation of our institutions, we should explore and utilize the intellectual resources and legacies of our giants, such as Steve Biko, Paulo Freire, on his writing, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Ngugi wa Thiong'o on the decolonized mind, and the likes of Frantz Fanon and many other transformative public intellectuals and activists. We should also factor in the whole body of literature on the African Renaissance philosophy and program that was reignited in the 1990s by our very own Chancellor, Dr. Thabo Mbeki, building on earlier traditions of people such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Sheikh Anta Diop, Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, and Pixley Ka-Isaka-Seme. The contemporary works of our own scholars, such as Neville Alexander, Professor Eskiam Patlele, are important. Or we need to also remind ourselves that works of people such as Angela Davis, Maya Angelou, Alice Walker, Grace Masuku, and many other distinguished scholars is worthy of our attention. These are works that should give us wings to our search for alternative discourses on development, on gender, on race, on democracy, and on indigenous knowledge systems. For this lecture, we have yet another great scholar who has an extensive footprint in this country, in Southern Africa, and the rest of our continent, and who has also combined the struggle for liberation with scholarship. We look forward to Dr. Ibbo Mandaza giving us the food for our minds and souls as he delivers this lecture. We anticipate with pleasure the nuggets that will emerge from the reminiscing of contemporaries and comrades who worked with Steve Biko as they take us down the memory lane, while being mindful of the challenges that are facing us today. Let me close my remarks with this instructive reminder from the late President of our country, Nelson Mandela, as he concluded his book, The Long Walk to Freedom. Quote, "I've walked that long road to freedom. I've tried not to falter. I've made missteps along the way, but I've discovered the secret that after climbing a great wall, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I've taken a moment to rest, but I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom come responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended," unquote. Indeed, drawing the inspiration from Steve Biko and many other struggle icons, we must realize that the mission to complete this journey to the promised land falls squarely on our shoulders, that is you and I. We cannot betray the glorious history of those who came before us and laid the foundation. We now need to allow ourselves to sit back and ensure that we have the opportunity to absorb the feast of ideas that are going to be dished out to us tonight. We need to carry the word beyond this university to our own communities so that these enlightening conversations should spread beyond just the halls of universities. With these few words, I want to say we are most welcome once more, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Let's put our hands together again. Just a few household rules and announcements. Twitter information, you say at Biko Foundation or at UNISA. or hashtag Biko lecture. For a change, today you tweet, the characters have been expanded, I hear, to accommodate President Donald Trump, because it's very difficult to unpack policy which is coming through tweet. For a change, you tweet about this lecture rather than tweeting about bringing that laundry which is in the drying yard in, or closing a window, something of this nature. The VC, Prof. Makanya, says we're not where we were in 1994. And certainly we are not where we intended to be. There is a word in English, they say interregnum. It means the new is taking too long to be born, and the old is taking too long to die. I think we are in that situation in the country. I'm sure you do have that feeling. Now, that reshuffle with great humility and respect for age, I will ask the first three not to leave the stage, but to move to the higher chairs. My reshuffle is a fair one because you are moved to the higher chairs and you don't disappear. That time we've been waiting for, that moment of inviting this great scholar, this great African who has been around, who has championed many academic causes in Southern Africa and Africa, is upon us. I will ask us to put a very warm round of applause as we welcome Dr. Ibbo Mandaza to deliver the 18th Steve Biko Memorial Lecture. Let's put our hands together.
The Vice-Chancellor, Professor Makanya, members of Council, here present, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, High Commissioners, here present, Ministers, University Management, all protocols observed, but I also want to acknowledge the various family. I can't see my daughter anyway. Where is she? Where's Nancy? Ah, I have family here, you know. Not just the Biko family. The Biko family, with whom I spent the whole afternoon with. Most pleased to meet you. We should have met long ago. But it's never too late. The various friends that we have known over the last 40 years, you can see Sam Shakong over there. And of course, Louis Milamu and many others who are here, including Snooki, who has been hiding for such a long time. The Vice-Chancellor has put out a very strong challenge, and I hope I'll live up to it. I want to begin by congratulating the Biko family for the Honorary Doctorate that Steve Biko has received this evening through Samora, who looks so much like Steve. I thought I was seeing Steve when he walked in for lunch this afternoon. Likewise, I'd like to thank UNISA for bestowing such an honor on Steve Biko. It is most deserved and certainly will have enhanced the stature of this great institution. More important, I thank you, all of you who have responsible for affording me this occasion. It's a rare honor and privilege to present the 18th Steve Biko Memorial Lecture today. More so, since I'm also a contemporary of Steve Biko, along with some of the comrades here, one of whom, Harry Ngokulu, no doubt, was behind this invitation. Nepotism, it's called. But I'm thrilled all the same. I'm delighted to be here for an evening during which I can also wax nostalgic about our role, and that of Steve Biko in particular, who remains our indelible symbol, a student activist in the 70s. It is not a coincidence that in 1973, you heard from the Gosinati talking about his father. Steve Biko was banned along with Harry Ngokulu and others in South Africa. I, along with the others, were also banned in Zimbabwe, detained, and subsequently exiled. It's not a coincidence because in the 70s there was coordination between South Africa and Zimbabwe. And I was part of that group that constituted the Black Consciousness Movement in Zimbabwe in 1972, the same year during which I served as president of the student union at the then University of Rhodesia. As such, I was invited by Steve Biko and his team, which include the likes of Harry Ngokulu, Bani Pichiana, Srindi Mudli, and Benny Kwapa, to the conference of the South African Students Association organization, SASO, which was to be held in Turfloop in May 1972. Regrettably, I was not only refused an entry visa by the South African mission in Salisbury. You remember Salisbury? But simultaneously slapped with a prohibition order, prohibited immigrant. Incidentally, I was somewhat surprised to discover that the ban was still in place some 17 years later, in 1989, when, at the invitation of the Black Lawyers Association, I was to address their forum at the Holiday Inn, Jan Smuts Airport. Thanks to my sister, Mojanku Gumbi, who is here tonight, who was there to meet me at the immigration desk at Jan Smuts, and spent some 2 hours or so negotiating on the phone with the authorities in Pretoria. I was eventually afforded entry, but on the condition that my first visit to apartheid South Africa would be confined to the vicinity of the hotel at Jan Smuts Airport. So I presented my speech. Do you remember it, Mojangu? Spent the best part of the day with my learned friends, and then back to the airport for the flight back to independent Zimbabwe. No doubt, the invitation to the forum of the Black Lawyers Association was an echo of the aborted one to the SASO conference in Turfloop 17 years earlier. And likewise, it would have been the same Black Consciousness Movement, BCM comrades, will have been responsible for my first visit to this great and beautiful country, even though far less ceremonious than today's occasion. Forgive me for waxing nostalgic, but my association with the Black Consciousness Movement has been an enduring one. Ever since my first telephone conversations with Steve Biko and others here in this room in 1972, the reunion of the BCM comrades in Gaborone, Botswana in 1977, when thanks to the same Harry Ngokulu, who was in the same department, I landed my first job as lecturer in the Department of Political Studies at the University of Botswana, together with people like Sam Shakong, Marcus Balintulo, and many other South African exiles. My roles later, on the strength of my position as a senior bureaucrat in post-independent Zimbabwe, in facilitating the relocation of and granting asylum to several BCM members, including Mosebuji Mangena, and one called Strike sitting in front of me, in the early 80s, when they had fallen out with the Botswana authorities. You were almost hanged, my friend. The invitation by the BCM Azapo colleagues for me to present the Steve Biko Memorial Lecture in Joburg on 11th September 2004. And Gosina just reminded me that in 1990, Bani Pichana and himself were guests at Sapes Trust for a conference of the BCM, the outcome of which was that book, Bounds of Possibility. And above all, today, yes, I repeat, I'm most privileged to honor and remember my brother, Steve Biko, in this memorial lecture. This has been a relationship developed on the back of our shared struggle for the liberation of this region, in the acknowledgement that all our liberation movements, including the Black Consciousness movement, have been part and parcel of that struggle that has brought us this far in our sub-region. And that obviously, Steve Biko is no less a hero than many heroes and heroines that have perished in or survived the struggle for freedom and political independence. I would have met Steve Biko in person in Botswana in 1977, August 1977, were it not for his incarceration and subsequent death at the hands of the apartheid killers on 12 September, 40 years ago. Therefore, the murder of Steve Biko marks both the historical watershed of those heady days of a liberation struggle, which had now enveloped the entire region, including South Africa itself. Between, on the one hand, the backdrop of the political developments of the 60s and early 70s, including in particular the intensification of the armed struggle in Zimbabwe, as the northeastern frontier was opened in late 72, the Portuguese coup in May 1974, and the subsequent attainment of political independence in Mozambique and Angola in June and November 1975, respectively. And of course, the Soweto uprising of June 1976. And on the other, the turning point towards the 40 years, from 1977 to this day. Yes, we converge here to honor and remember Steve this evening, while reflecting on both the successes and failures of post-liberation Southern Africa. Hence, the title of my presentation today, Pan-Africanism, Class, and the State, an overview of the 40 years since the murder of Steve Biko. In doing so, I wish to preface my presentation with emphasis that Black consciousness is a child of Pan-Africanism, particularly to the extent that the latter informed and expressed itself through the African national struggle against imperialist and colonialist domination. Pan-Africanism itself was broader in import, with its origins in the New World Pan-Africanism of Marcus Garvey and W.B. Du Bois, and its subsequent influence in colonial West Africa. As J. Ayodele Langley, in his book Pan-Africanism and Nationalism in West Africa, 1900 to 1945, states, and I quote, "With the exception of South Africa, West Africa was the only region in colonial Africa where a nationalist intelligentsia of lawyers, merchants, journalists, doctors, and clergymen successfully sought to share political power with the colonial ruler and took upon itself the duty of disseminating political ideas and values." End of quote. With the passage of time, Pan-African ideas and organization grew in the context of the relationship between Pan-Africanism in the old days and the new Pan-Africanism of New World Afro-Americans, and thereby establishing Pan-Africanism as a global movement. Incidentally, some of us here were delegates to the 6th Pan-African Congress in Dar es Salaam in 1975, which included the likes of Walter Rodney. I met him at that time for the first time, as well as the 7th Pan-African Congress in Kampala in 1994. We remember with pride the theme of that Kampala Congress: don't agonize, organize. Therefore, Pan-Africanism has to be understood in terms of the historical, political, and economic factors that also defined the process whereby Africa and Africans were relegated in the international division of labor. The European expansion that began in the 15th century and saw Africa, in quotation mark, discovered and developed and underdeveloped as a geopolitical concept within the global parameters of a voracious onslaught. In particular, the transatlantic slave trade, through which Africans were dehumanized, pillaged, and transported as mere commodities across the oceans. The colonial era, during which the mother continent was balkanized, parceled out among the European powers at Berlin in 1884, and whole peoples dispossessed of their political sovereignty, economic rights, and sheer capacity. And of course, the current period during which, notwithstanding the gains made with the attainment of political independence and the formal end of apartheid in this country, we still find Africa and Africans at the bottom of the heap of human existence and development. Needless to add, as Angela Davis said in the lecture last year, not only the hidden, but also the overt structural dimensions of racism persist worldwide, along with the economic, cultural, and generally institutionalized form of racism. Not least in the USA itself, and it would seem as partly a wide backlash to the election of the first African president, Barack Obama. So who would have thought, given the advances made on the back of the civil rights movement in the USA, or the formal end of apartheid in 1994, there would be need for the Black Lives Matter movement in North America, or the recent affront, what do you call it, Black Monday or something, in which the old South African flag was flaunted and its anthem recited in open defiance of a not-so-new South Africa. It is a solemn reminder that Black consciousness is far from being obsolete. Therefore, recalling that profound warning by Malcolm X in 1960, I quote, "No matter where the black person is, he will never be respected until Africa is a world power," end of quote. This, in brief, summarizes the goal of Pan-Africanism. But here is to contextualize this around the theme of this lecture, especially to the extent to which white settler colonialism and apartheid in South Africa gave rise to a Pan-Africanism, in essence not apart from the West African one, or the African American variant of it, but also subsequently requiring a protracted armed struggle, which in turn mobilized and fed into the Pan-African movement itself, the OAU and its Liberation Committee, and the frontline states of Southern Africa, which we should not forget, especially in this country, included Nigeria, whose population in 1978 contributed a naira each, or $1 each, as a contribution to the liberation effort in Southern Africa. I mention this because Southern Africans, we tend to forget. And here, not only in this country, but even in my country, Zimbabwe, Nigeria derided. Nigeria was big. There's nothing that incensed Nigerians more than the situation in Southern Africa, in particular this country. Behind all this, we consider the following: the enduring relevance of black consciousness in this historical conjuncture, the imperative of deep regional integration of sub-region as both a reflection of the political economy of Southern Africa and a building block for the African Union and its goal of Pan-African unity and economic development. And above all, the relationship between this class, our class, the petty and comprador bourgeoisie, the looting class, Figeni, that inherits power at independence and with the formal end of apartheid, the African nationalist ideology and the state. This is the old debate as to whether African nationalist bourgeoisie enterprise is feasible and desirable in this phase, or what the ANC here in South Africa calls the National Democratic Revolution. This too will be subject to scrutiny to determine both its relevance and utility, if any, in characterizing post-apartheid South Africa. Now to a brief political economy of Southern Africa, which developed historically, economically, and to some extent even politically on the back of the imperialist domination I've described on the one hand, and on the other, the struggle which by its very nature and conduct required a supranational Pan-African solidarity across the continent through the OAU's Liberation Committee and the frontline states, the outcome of which has been SADC in particular. Therefore, the foundations of contemporary Southern Africa are implicit in the following mission statement by one Cecil John Rhodes on the eve of the Berlin Congress of 1884, which, as already stated, divided Africa among the European colonialists, but unleashing a combination of historical, economic, and political forces which have since then carved and shaped the sub-region. And I quote from Cecil John Rhodes: I was in the East End of London, a working class quarter, yesterday, and attended a meeting of the unemployed. I listened to the wild speeches, which was just a cry for bread, bread. And on my way home, I pondered over the scene, and I became more than ever convinced of the importance of imperialism. My cherished idea is a solution of the social problem. That is, in order to save 40,000 inhabitants of the United Kingdom from a bloody civil war, we colonial statesmen must acquire new lands to settle the surplus population, to provide new markets for the goods produced in the factories and mines. The empire, says Rhodes, as I've always said, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid civil war, you must become imperialist. End of quote. In short, it's on the back of Rhodes' dream of a British Empire from Cape to Cairo that South Africa became both a launching pad for the colonial mission in the neighboring countries, some of whom arrogantly carried his name, Rhodesia, and the economic powerhouse around which the South African Customs Union, SACU, and SADC itself revolve, accompanied, regrettably, by the legacy of unequal and uneven development between and within each of the countries that constitute these organizations. Yet it is also true that today, no country in this sub-region can account for itself without reference to the others. And South Africa in particular, and to a lesser extent also Zimbabwe, has to remember always that she owes this level of economic and social development as much to the blood and sweat of her citizens as to that of the millions of the brothers and sisters from the neighboring countries that today constitute SACU and SADC. Yesterday, it was mainly through the supply of cheap labor to the mines, farms, and factories of apartheid South Africa and Rhodesia. Today, the entire region depends on South Africa as a marketplace, the supplier of goods and services, as evidenced by the financial institutions, mining houses, industrial complexes, and supermarket chains, all of whom have spread their tentacles across SACU and SADC. And now, as a workplace for many an economic refugee, skilled and professional workers unable to find lucrative employment in their own countries, as well as traders and students. This is neither an exaggeration of the level of interdependence between South Africa and its neighbors, nor a warning to the agents of xenophobia among us. It is merely an acknowledgement of the ties that bind us, historically, economically, politically, and culturally. As history informs us, and recalling in particular the words of Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution, whose centenary we marked 2 days ago on 7th November, there is a dialectical relationship between domination on the one hand and resistance and revolution on the other. Not surprisingly, the anti-colonial struggles of the 20th century drew inspiration from the Bolshevik Revolution, from Europe itself to China, Vietnam, and Cambodia in Asia, to Cuba, Nicaragua, and Latin America, and to Africa itself. But it was here, in Southern Africa in particular, that this struggle was played out from the 60s onwards, delicately poised in a Cold War in which the Western world largely stood behind apartheid and white settler colonialism, while the socialist bloc led by the Soviet Union and China supported the liberation moves of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. Therein grew the impression, but less the reality, that the liberation struggle in Southern Africa was based upon Marxist-Leninist ideology and its goal of a socialist revolution. At any rate, this was the form, but less the content, that inspired the younger generation of Southern Africans from the 70s onwards, as thousands upon thousands of youth crossed borders to join the struggle, which was being waged under the liberation movements based mainly in Dar es Salaam, Lusaka, Maputo, and later Luanda in Angola. As it has turned out, the struggle was less about a socialist revolution than an African nationalist quest to resolve its own concept of the national question, to be resolved through the attainment of political independence, or as you say in this country, the national democratic revolution, as the foundation of the nation state in the making, and the task of resolving such economic questions as the land question, an improved standard of living for the working people, democratization of the education and health systems, resolution of the gender question, and in general, the restoration of the dignity of the African person after centuries of white domination. Therefore, the race question remains a dominant category in any contemporary analysis of the African nationalist struggle, not least in this region. And given the complex interaction of race, color, and class on the one hand, and on the other, the current conjunction in which the Cold War has dissipated, the socialist dream rendered elusive, and international capital, at least for the time being, reigning almost supreme. All this has a significant bearing on our subject this evening, namely the relationship between Pan-Africanism and its corollary of African nationalism and black consciousness, the class question, which has tended to be hidden behind the race issue in this region, and the state, which is caught up in the complex but not less capitalist interaction between the comprador bourgeoisie within and outside the state, and international capital. We will return to this shortly, but suffice to state for the time being that it is bold and commendable for my younger brother, Blade Nzimande, and the South African Communist Party to continue relentlessly to remind us all about what might have been had our liberation movements been able to stick to the letter and text of Lenin's State and Revolution. It was compulsory reading during the struggle. And I saw that Blade was last week stating that everyone had to carry a copy of it. I don't know, can you still find it? Hence, the relevance of the observations by Thabo Mbeki during his address on the occasion of the centenary of O.R. Tambo's birthday on 27th October 2017. He was stating only the obvious, if we acknowledge, which we must, that the African nationalist mission is essentially a class project. I quote from Thabo Mbeki. The ANC contains within its ranks people who are absolutely contemptuous of the fundamental values of the ANC, at whose center is a commitment to serve the people. These are people who only see the ANC as a step ladder to enable them to access state power for the express purpose of using that access for self-enrichment, end of quote. Surprise? And didn't Chris Hani remark as follows on the eve of the new dispensation on 29th October 1992? I quote, "What I fear is that the liberators emerge as elitists who drive around in Mercedes-Benzes and use the resources of this country to live in palaces and to gather riches," end of quote. Yes, I wish also to join you all in celebrating and remembering O.R. Tambo on the occasion of the centenary of his birthday. No one who had the privilege to know this great man would fail to remember him as the warmest of human beings, the ultimate father figure, a rare intellect. The more reason we must recall his warning in December 1990 on his return to South Africa. And I quote, "The struggle is far from over. If anything, it has become more complex and therefore more difficult," end of quote. And as he handed over the ANC at that first conference in 1990 inside South Africa, he added, and I quote, "I have devotedly watched over the organization all these years. I now hand it back to you, bigger, stronger, intact. Guard our precious movement," end of quote. I'm grateful to Thabo Leshilo, if he's here, for this reference. I found it on his Facebook on 27th October on OR's birthday. However, comrades, it is not enough that we should lament at the crisis we find ourselves in post-liberation Southern Africa, Fikeni. Not least when our class, the inheritors of state power, are themselves so capable as to be blind to the obvious causes of the current malaise. We have to be courageous and honest in retracing our steps, including a solid analysis of the nature and content of the struggle itself, its class character, the political and economic realities attendant to this transition, and the specter of globalization in this post-Cold War era. Without a sound analysis of the crisis, there can be no hope of resolving it. Tomorrow, some of us here meet at the Mapungubwe Institute, which is co-hosting with the SABC Trust an international conference on post-liberation Southern Africa, which should have been held in Harare on the occasion of the SABC Trust 30th anniversary, which was coincidentally given OR's birthday, 27th October, having been founded on that date in 1987. It is now postponed, this conference, to February 2018. The main proposition in that conference is that it is more than opportune for a systematic audit to be undertaken on post-liberation Southern Africa. And this must include the following: an interrogation of the romantic, if not also self-serving expectation that the struggle would necessarily yield better models of governance than has been the case in the rest of post-colonial Africa. Secondly, an analysis of the relationship between the nature and the content of the struggle in each of the 5 countries under scrutiny on the one hand, and on the other, the social realities which are characterized by continuities as opposed to transformation in the economic and social realms, and the consequent rise of a comprador class of leaders in both the state and private sectors, and the hegemonic oversight of international capital. As I've already alluded, we must transcend the tendency to lament the apparent failure to fulfill the goals of the liberation struggle. Instead, we must interrogate the historical foundations of those goals and objectives, and the realities inherited at independence or at the end of apartheid, and in particular assess the strategic, technocratic, and leadership requirements for a transformative agenda in this era. It is now more than 4 decades since the attainment of political independence in Mozambique and Angola, nearly 4 decades in Zimbabwe, nearly 3 decades in Namibia, and more than 2 decades since the formal end of apartheid in South Africa. So with the passage of time, and indeed the blatant evidence of failure on the part of the post-liberation agenda right across the region, so too is the veil of mystery, awe, and romance dissipated over the struggle itself. For example, can there be established a relationship between the pathologies of the struggle, including, please remember, comrades who are here, the predominance of militarism and or security over politics, brute force as a means of instilling conformity and blind loyalty to authority, witch hunting, abuse of women and vulnerable groups, ethnic politics, etc., on the one hand. And on the other, the current political and economic pitfalls so rampant in the post-liberation era, particularly a leadership given to impunity, a disdain for democratic and constitutional governance, disdainful of the importance of national institutions, the separation of powers, accountability, and norms and values. Leaders who are so predatory, compradorial by nature. In conclusion, I would like to consider briefly this issue of this comprador bourgeois class that has captured the state in our countries and dominated our economies in partnership with international capital. Mao Zedong, if anyone remembers him, in his analysis of the classes in Chinese society states that, and I quote, a comprador, in the original sense of the word, was a Chinese manager or the senior Chinese employee in a foreign commercial establishment. The comprador served foreign economic interests and had close connection with the imperialism and foreign capital, end of quote. Therefore, the origins of the comprador bourgeoisie in this region in particular, and Africa generally, is to be found in the nature and impact of white settler colonialism and apartheid itself, which directly and economically impeded and preempted the development of an indigenous national bourgeoisie. True to their class, African nationalists have tended to view such legislation as a Land Apportionment Act of 1930 in Rhodesia and apartheid itself in South Africa as largely racial, when in reality it was economic warfare par excellence, wherein the indigenous people were reduced to classes of landless peasants, wage earners, and an amorphous middle class composed of school teachers, nurses, labor supervisors, journalists, lawyers, doctors, petty traders, and educated elites generally. The combination of this historical backdrop and the relentless globalization has virtually killed the prospects of post-liberation economies producing a national bourgeoisie that would serve as an anchor around which to define both the national economy and the national interest. We don't have national economies, no national interest. Whatever potential there has been, for such a class to emerge has been reduced to a predatory and parasitic class of a comprador bourgeoisie that straddles both public and private sectors in our region. Therefore, by definition, our comprador bourgeoisie is a class not rooted in production. On the contrary, it thrives on backhanders, fat rewards for crooked contracts and shady deals, official corruption, and looting of state coffers. Not to forget the casino economy era in Zimbabwe, during which the comprador class thrived through the agency of the central bank, but at the expense of the economy in general and collapse of the currency in 2008-2009. All here in South Africa, a reference to Thabo Mbeki's complaints and the specter of state capture and corruption. The state capture thing is bigger. By nature, the comprador bourgeoisie is a class in itself and for itself. It is bereft of a national vision, no a national interest, mainly because it is incapable of conceiving with such. And more significantly, it's a class that lives for today, uncertain about tomorrow, and hence the looting becomes a frenzy. These are nothing less than thieves, says my brother, Gilbert Mdenda. In all this, the post-liberation state becomes a theater of comprador intrigue. As the inheritors in waiting, the African nationalists and their class associates were always easy prey for international capital in its quest for new representatives and agents to facilitate its enterprise in the post-liberation dispensation. So, comrades, state capture begins even before Freedom Day itself. In the role of such multinationals as Anglo-American Corporation, is still here, Tiny Rollins Ronro, in the compradorization of many of the key African nationalist leadership. Read that book by Bauer, Portrait of a Tycoon, how our national leaders in Zimbabwe in particular were bankrolled even before independence. But perhaps not surprisingly, it has been largely through the extractive industries of Southern Africa that the comprador bourgeoisie has grown during this post-liberation period, expressing itself as it has, not only through the members of the political and military security and bureaucratic hierarchy, and in collaboration with their counterparts in the private sector and in multinationals at home and abroad, but also in the apparent conflation between power, corruption, and wealth. The 15 billion diamond scandal in Zimbabwe is perhaps the most symbolic in this sad spectacle that has become a cancer in our sub-region. And yet, it could be only the proverbial tip of the iceberg for what is clearly an integral component of the state, and not least the secretariat state in Zimbabwe. To quote one mysterious Ken Yamamoto, I'm in touch with him, but I've never known who he is. I quote, a president discloses that mines essentially owned by his government looted $15 billion, and that the newspapers don't even make it front page news with screaming headlines, is a sign of a country that has lost its soul. What matters is that the stolen 15 billion Zimbabwe could have provided its economy. What matters is that with the stolen $15 billion, Zimbabwe could have provided its economy a huge bailout, funding refurbishment of railways, infrastructure, construction of power plants, construction and expansion of national highways, a bailout to the sinking industrial sector, provided the clean water in cities, funded alternative agriculture and processing industries, and invested in clean energy. Could also build at least 10 power stations, providing over 1,000 megawatts of power for local consumption and export. Could also build hospitals and import the latest technology and Mugabe himself would not need to fly to Singapore and Dubai for medical treatment. It's selfish to stash national wealth in foreign countries and then fly there for medical treatment. The stolen 15 billion could transform Zimbabwe overnight, taking millions out of street vending back into the productive sector. Sadly, while he was touting something called Zima Asset, Robert Mugabe did not tell Zimbabweans the secret he knew, that billions had been and were at that material time being siphoned out of the country. He only revealed this when he turned 92. The question that keeps nudging my mind, says Yamamoto, is how do human beings become so bland and lose their souls to such a point? How does Mugabe sleep well at night? How does coterie of praise singers and bootlickers live with themselves? How do you preside over such theft and keep a straight face? How do you disadvantage the 99% of the population and not batter an eyelid? What kind of people live between the two rivers, Zambezi and Limpopo? How do people continue to eat, drink, sleep, go to work, vend, or even make merry in the midst of such scandal? End of quote. So, the state has become the vehicle and agency for primitive accumulation and predatory conduct on the part of this class that inherits it. This is what happens when a bourgeois state model is inherited, but without a national bourgeoisie. Here, therefore, a comparison between our situation in Africa and that which prevails in the bourgeois democracies after which our own states are modeled. George Bush or Barack Obama served as representatives of the national bourgeoisie in the USA, and on exit from the White House, returned to the corporate world, or, as in the case of Bush, to the oil company which the Bush family has owned for more than 200 years. In Africa, you enter the State House either as a former school teacher, liberation movement bureaucrat, or as security aide, but with virtually nothing but the clothes one is wearing. You accumulate wealth in the course of your tenure as head of state, and in most cases, do everything possible to remain therein for life, or risk becoming homeless, jailed, or exiled. That is, if you allow yourself to be voted out. So here are some anecdotes to our narrative before I conclude. When Kenneth Kaunda lost the election to Chiluba in Zambia in 1991, Mobutu of Zaire was heard to remark, I quote, "Kaunda losing the election? How?" "That's stupid." End of quote. Well, we all know how the Mobutu regime ended, with him dying in exile in Morocco. On Kaunda's part, here is a rare example of a democratic transition in Africa, but also the selflessness on the part of that generation of leaders that include Nyerere, O.R. Tambo, Mandela, and Kaunda himself. I had the opportunity to visit President Kaunda's State House in Lusaka in 1989 in the course of preparing that manuscript on the history of SADC. After breakfast, the President took us on a tour of the State House complex, including the golf course therein. At the end of it, I was left with a distinct impression that President Kaunda regarded the State House as his very home, to rule and live there till his last day. Subsequently, I cautioned my colleagues, some of whom are members of the Surface Trust Network, but who were also the founders of the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy in Zambia, MMD. I said, in the event you win the election, comrades, you might have to build a new State House for Chiluba and leave Kaunda where he is, or find a new house for the outgoing president. My remarks were met with scornful laughter. Kaunda has probably several houses at home and abroad, was the response. Well, the reality was that Kaunda had known no other home or house than the State House in Lusaka and the several state lodges scattered around Zambia. Were it not for a colleague who provided him shelter at a house in Roma Township in Lusaka in 1991, the old man and Mrs. Kaunda would have been homeless until brought to their senses several years after his defeat at the polls in 1991. The government provided him and his wife the residence in which he lives today. But don't forget how Chuluba tried to exile the old man. That since he was born in Malawi, from where his parents had come to Zambia as missionaries in the late 1920s, Kaunda was an alien. Can you imagine? I should add that the moral of the story about an outgoing president being threatened with homelessness has since not been lost in the neighborhood, where current incumbents not only had erected the most expensive private residences and mansions at home, but also, at least I'm informed through the media, also arranged for the purchase of outrageously pricey properties abroad, including here in South Africa. Conclusion. So, given the backdrop of post-liberation in Southern Africa so far, there is the inescapable conclusion that the African nationalist era, inclusive of the national liberation movements, ANC, ZANU, MPLA, FRELIMO, these movements have long served their purpose as an agency for the attainment of political independence and or the end of apartheid, and no more. As a class project, it is both historically preempted and ideologically constrained from taking us further than where we have come so far. That's obvious. More than that, it has been naive of anybody, if not self-indulgent and downright presumptuous, to have expected that this class of leaders that inherited state power could have served as the anticipated vanguard, the substitute for the national bourgeoisie through which to drive the national development agenda and enhance the fortunes of the nation state in the making. It is an understatement, therefore, to conclude that the post-liberation phase so far has been a resounding failure, especially on the economic front. Therefore, as in the rest of post-independence Africa, Kwame Nkrumah's dictum that, quote, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all other things will be added unto you," now rings hollow in the face of the pitfalls of national consciousness that Frantz Fanon warned about already in the 1960s. So even the political kingdoms themselves have lost their gloss, increasingly tarnished by a breed of clueless leaders, mavericks and megalomaniacs. And so the mass of our people, the wretched of the earth, as Fanon called them, have lost hope and have lost the contagious hope of the 60s and 70s. They remain disenchanted and almost helpless in the face of states characterized less by the commitment to democratic governance and progressive economic development than by crude and backward forms of mass regimentation as opposed to genuine mobilization, mainly in the interest of the indefinite incumbency and veneration of the big leader. And I've been asked to, if I can find it, Harry, the big leader syndrome. This is a quotation from William Tunga, now the former Chief Justice of Kenya, on the big leader. His face is on money. His photograph hangs in every office in his realm. His ministers wear gold pins with tiny photographs of him on the lapels of the pinstriped tailored suits. He names streets, airports, football stadiums, hospitals and universities after himself. He carries a silver inlaid ivory rungu, or an ornately carved walking stick, or a fly whisk, or chiefly stool. He insists on being called doctor. of being the big elephant or the number one peasant or nice old man or the national miracle or the most popular leader in the world is every pronouncement is reported on the first page of the newspaper. He shuffles ministers without warning, paralyzing policies, decisions as he undercuts pretenders to his throne. Sounds like Zimbabwe. He scapegoats minorities to show up popular support. He bans all political parties except the one he controls. He rigs elections. He emasculates the courts and he cows the press. He stifles academia. He gives the church the big man's off-the-cuff remarks. He demands thunderous applause from the legislature when ordering far-reaching changes in the Constitution. He blesses his home region with highways, schools, hospitals, housing projects, irrigation schemes, and the presidential mansion. He packs the civil service with his tribesmen. His enemies are harassed by youth wingers from the ruling party. His enemies are detained or exiled, humiliated, tortured, or killed. What is to be done? How shall we stop this rot? First, the need to reform the state in the context of political and constitutional reform generally. In doing so, we need to take account of the dynamics in each of the countries of our region. Last year, just as the contradictions within the state in Zimbabwe were becoming sharper, and the current process of its self-immolation was accelerating, some of us proposed the National Transition Authority. This involved the idea of a group of selected non-partisan patriots and technocrats taking over from the executive, operating as a cabinet for a period of 2 years during which political and economic reforms will be implemented, but reporting to Parliament and a model representing the best possible separation of powers practice. On the economic front, this would include a reform and reconstruction program led by technocrats and experts and informed by the past precedents elsewhere in the world. Of course, this was an ambitious proposal, gone more likely at the stage at which the state has all but collapsed, when conflict is at its toll and national security threatened to the core, than when the incumbent government still has a will to go on regardless, and the formal opposition is more obliging and complicit than given to open challenge and confrontation with the ruling party or state. As one of our elders, who will remain nameless for now, remarked to me last year, quote, "There's hardly any country in our sub-region which does not qualify for the NTA. But equally, no one state will buy the idea," end of quote. However, the idea of the NTA does include some of the key elements attendant to the much-needed reform of the state: progressive constitutions and constitutionalism, adherence to the principle and practices of the separation of powers, including an accountable executive, a vibrant parliament, and a fiercely independent judiciary, restoration of national institutions which are independent and non-partisan, and the respect of the rule of law, democratic discourse, and progressive social development. A close examination of the problems that afflict the state in our continent generally points to the institution of the executive president. This is the worst thing ever, as being at the center of our problems. This, as I've just quoted, has produced the big man syndrome. All-powerful, mostly unaccountable, and given to impunity. Therefore, I agree with Peter Anyang' Nyong'o of Kenya, who, in his presentation at the 4th Pan-African Lecture at Suppers Trust, 28 September 2017, recommended the abolition of the executive president in our constitutions as a critical first step towards the reform of the state. It is true that even the institution of prime minister can become a temptation for the abuse of power in the hands of a reckless leader. But in historical retrospect and given current precedents, the potential of a prime minister to get away with it is much less than in the case of the executive president. Second, the imperative for economic transformation. With respect to South Africa in particular, this raises the subject of the national democratic revolution. a term borrowed from Lenin's State and Revolution, and thereby implying the first but prerequisite stage for the socialist revolution. As I've alluded earlier, the concept of the national democratic revolution is not only pretentious and self-indulgent on the part of our ANC comrades. It is historically, politically, and economically out of sync with the realities of South Africa, except if it denotes the current stage during which there have been commendable advances made with respect to the institution of democratic tools in this country. Respect of the law, rule of law, generally, the separation of powers under which the executive in South Africa has been given a run for its money. And so far, the big man syndrome has been preempted. Please keep it up here. We depend on you. So the problem relates to the economic realm in which new dispensation has so far lacked the capacity to institute the required transformative program. Clearly, the earlier strategy which appeared to inform the Mbeki era of trying to forge an alliance between the white bourgeoisie and the would-be emergent black bourgeoisie on the back of black economic empowerment B program appears not to have yielded the expected results. And as a result, it has fed the latter B into the production mill of the comprador bourgeoisie. The fat cats who don't work. So the white bourgeoisie in this country remains largely intact across the economy and appears to be growing and thriving better in the last 2 decades of post-apartheid. Not least in the agricultural sector where, given the historical and economic legacy of apartheid and the attendant urbanization over the decades, there has not been as much pressure for land reform as has been the case in Zimbabwe. Herein lies the burden of history and the accompanying backdrop of an economy almost impervious to change and transformation, not only in South Africa but throughout the region. In the face of this, and without the requisite policy interventions and strategies, even that which my brother Tandika Mkandawira calls the democratic developmental state agenda appears elusive. However, the Malaysia experience, or nearer home, the Ethiopian and Rwanda models can help to inform the kind of economic reform and reconstruction program that is so urgent, provided the principles and the spirit of democratic developmental state are kept essential. The latter, sadly, is largely absent in the Rwandan and Ethiopian models, with an emphasis only on a thoroughgoing and accelerated economic transformation programs led by technocratic leadership and implemented by hard-nosed experts and technocrats. Third, any national program cannot be sustained on its own, especially given the current process of economic globalization in which economies of the world are regulated and structured from a single center of financial capital. It therefore becomes necessary to re-envision the Pan-African agenda in the current context of increased and deeper regional and continental integration, which takes into account both the general Pan-African viewpoint for continental unity, but also examines the internal specificities of the different regions which could be utilized to implement meaningful integration. I refer here to the Surface Trust Colloquium of 2000 and the publication thereof, Pan-Africanism and Integration in Africa, edited by myself and Daniel Abuderi. I want to conclude with 2 references to this work. First, Kwesi Pra's, many of you know Kwesi Pra. Kwesi Pra's assertion that African neo-colonial states are the very contradiction of Pan-Africanism. He argues that they are neither nation-states nor nations. In his view, they are simply states. Neo-colonial states whose political, cultural, and economic structures have from birth been linked in imitation and subservience to the interests of the former colonial and other metropolitan powers. Therefore, in his view, to base regional integration on these states amounts to no more than an assumption that there is a historical viability for the neo-colonial state as a departure point for African development, renaissance, or advancement. I differed slightly with Kwesi in the debate that engaged among the best minds that Africa has produced at that conference. I recommended, and still do, that SADC should now transcend mere economic cooperation in order to pursue deep integration on the basis of a shared history, as I've outlined herein, and political solidarity through what I call supranationalism, by which I mean Pan-Africanism. And I quote, "This is because supranationalism and Pan-Africanism here requires the need to transcend the arena of national interests, because the latter will in effect only be enhanced through some sacrifice of the principles of sovereignty in the pursuit of regional economic reciprocity. In this regard, supranationalism is akin to deep integration, which is the pooling of sovereignty on a wide range of policy issues, which can be the basis of a political union, or what I call the Federation of Southern Africa, as a building block towards the realization of the goals and objectives of the African Union, and on the basis of which Africa can take its place as an equal partner in the global community," end of quote. So yes, there is light at the end of the tunnel, provided all of us, especially the younger generation, Samora, on this continent and in its diaspora, persist and intensify the struggle, subscribing thereby to the Pan-Africanist slogan, to which Steve Biko would have subscribed, no doubt. Don't agonize, organize. Thank you.
Let's put our hands together again. Thank you. Thank you. I want us to repeat this line just when we thought we were now getting thoroughly depressed by the clinical dissection of what a post-liberation situation becomes. Don't agonize, organize. Therefore, you are the leader you've been waiting for. Because other people are waiting for December, and they're sitting at home, and they think liberation is a virtual reality or an augmented reality that can be created in the cyberspaces. Wow, what a journey. As we now transition, this is the day of contemporaries of Steve Biko, as you heard. We're going to call these seasoned veterans and contemporaries. Professor Nengwe Kulu, Mamutoko Mbumlwana, no Ambassador Mtinso, to come and join us here as the panelists. This is the last item in the agenda. They will just be doing their brief reflections. These are the people who lived, who touched Biko, and some of us just read about him. Let's put our hands together. And as they are coming here, you note one thing. Leaders like Steve Biko, because they lived a meaningful life, a committed life, when they die, they leave a legacy. But some of us, when we die, will leave a vacancy. which can be advertised. Just a year, 2 years later, when you ask who was occupying this position, people will say, don't you remember the one who used to have a T-shirt, because there's nothing to hold on to. He used to sit in the cafeteria in that corner. So please, you still have a chance today. It's halftime. Change your game plan. And also the other beautiful thing, when all doors were shut by universities, UNISA was the last resort. You heard that from Gosinati. When they could not go anywhere, and UNISA is still here, doing exactly that. When you feel like you might be changed in your position, reshuffled, or sent away as an ambassador, UNISA will be here. Now let's call upon Umam Togo Mbumlwana to come and do her brief reflection. Let's put our hands together for her.
Thank you very much. We were sitting there, program director, with Ambassador Mtinso, saying that after this speech, we wonder if people will listen, but we will try our best to do our reflection. We were told we must be light, nothing serious, just reflection on how it was at the time in King Williamstown. And before I start, as you heard the speeches, we're not young at all. We've seen it all. It's almost like a pyramid. It was here, it was there, we are now here. So it is a challenge to those who must organize and not organize to take it back to where it ought to have been. My first encounter with Biko was in 1973 in King Williamstown, where, as we have heard, he was banned with other activists, and he was given space at an Anglican church called by Bishop David Russell. He was a reverend, a very young reverend at the time. Of course, Biko was running that office by remote control because he was banned. So-called remote control but we saw him quite often at the office. And so his hometown, of course, was King Williamstown, and his Kasi, as they say today, was Ginsberg. And some people, of the people in King Williamstown, were Mapetla Mohapi, his wife Notle Mohapi, Mampila Rampele, Slumgo Sokupa, Tenjwem Tinso, Ray Magida, and many others that we were working with at the office in King Williamstown. And of course, when that office was opened, King Williamstown was never the same, Ginsberg was never the same, and Zinyoga was never the same, where Zanempilo was. In her book, Lindy Wilson, she describes Biko as, I quote, a life-giving force whose vitality drew people to him, not only for his sharp intelligence and generous counsel, but for his exuberant energy and a contagious laugh, not only for his clear thinking and his refreshing political insight, but also his capacity to listen, his ability to place himself within a circle of people and not in a position up front. Lindy goes on to say, in terms of Biko's leadership style, I quote, not that people must follow him in a slavish kind of way, but that suddenly, and to their great surprise, they discovered themselves, they empowered themselves with their own resources, close quotes. I must say up front that indeed, through interaction with Biko and the King activists, I discovered myself. I was able to enter a space I thought was meant for the selected ones. I discovered talents I had that I didn't realize I had. I rubbed shoulders with people who were daring and brave, intellectuals who were comfortable in their interaction with people. In that circle, we were all expected to contribute. Elitism was not a possibility. I learned to stand up to being bullied by the police. The context at the time was of deep dehumanization of our people and oppression of black people by whites under apartheid. To Biko and black consciousness leaders, it was urgent for black people to be liberated from psychological oppression by regaining their inherent pride and dignity. My reflection, therefore, this evening is my public appreciation and thanks to Biko and colleagues in the Black Consciousness movement who, as Lindy says, helped me to find my role in, I quote, the quotation that has been used here, quest for true humanity, a just society. Thank you. Thank you for opening my eyes to how I could translate my anger and hatred of an unjust society and system into action, through being involved in SASO, in BCP, BPC, and so on. Thank you for giving space for me, who had been expelled from a university of Fort Hare, to contribute to the agenda and struggle for the liberation of our people. And by the way, I also registered at UNISA. Thank you, UNISA. I was accepted to first volunteer as a researcher for Black Review, Black Perspective, and other projects, so as to build this black pride we're talking about, to enthuse and affirm black initiatives that would counter the white narrative that black people were inferior. We did all this ourselves as black people, from research collection of data, analyzing, right up to the printing of publications. This taught me about the importance of knowledge and research as a basis for formulating opinions and policies. Those days, of course, there were no HR policies. Your recruitment was simply by saying, I want to be in this space. And they would say, are you sure? What do you believe in? You say, because I want justice. Job given. So, Tenji became a journalist. She had never been a journalist. We're dropouts, both of us. I also became a researcher. I'd never been a researcher because I was also a dropout. I didn't finish at Fort Hare. We had work to be done. We did it. There wasn't even Google to teach you how to do the work. You just did the work. Thank you for helping us and many others to live out the obligation to others in the expression of umntu ngumntu ngabantu, through making us live out black consciousness values. As students of Fort Hare, when we were in King and other areas, we did a lot of work around the communities. We spent nights and days reading, evaluating, asking ourselves questions on the type of society we were working to build. The work we did in conscientizing people through our community work helped us to connect with the realities of the people. I even participated in building a home, which I'd never done in my whole life. But of course, on a lighter note, after all the work, we also had Goombas. Those were the parties that we also used to bring more people in the fold, but to also de-stress. The development model that we used at the time, that was promoted by Biko and the leadership, was that of self-reliance as the basis of pride and dignity. In our communities, it was expected that people would analyze their problems, participate in their own development, and then be involved and be part of the solution. The service delivery model, where people wait for government to deliver, was never in our development strategy of our time. When I was at Forte, I had never heard of Palofre. I thought I was educated until I came into the fold of Black Consciousness Movement, where the methodology of Palofre was the ethos of the work we had to do. Thank you for accepting that our struggle was too serious for there to be people to be excluded on the basis of gender. As a woman, I did not feel as an outsider. Once at the height of killings and arrests of activists, Biko asked me a question that I was not expecting, because I always thought that they were leaders. He said to me, "What will you do if all of us were arrested? Are you ready to lead?" And of course, I'd never thought of that. To me, that was a clear message that we should all be ready to take over, so that so that the work we were doing at Leopold Street did not die. That is why we all knew what everybody else was doing, so that if one person got restricted, the other one took over. Ours was to defy the unjust system through doing things our way, which was our just way. Frankly, there was no feminist theory driving us. We just wanted to defeat the oppressive regime. We took very serious risk as women. On a lighter note, we always talk about, when we caution our girls now, don't take lifts from strangers. We actually did take lifts from strangers. We're still from trucks, traversing long distances to attend meetings and workshops and formation schools. Some of them right from Alice to Johannesburg. Biko was an empowering leader who believed in each person's potential. My first so-called written piece was so poor that he sent it right back to me with notes and a very simple rewrite, badly written. From then on, I knew that being in the struggle did not mean that one has to be sloppy in anything you do. It was important to prove to myself and to our society that we could do it. That is why I still believe today that Black people must always lead institutions and handle government with utmost sense of purpose, integrity, and professionalism, because society expects us to fail. I'm grateful for the solidarity that we got. It was the solidarity that taught us about intolerance of injustice. When any of us was banned, we simply did everything to undermine those orders because they were unjust. And the lesson for us then was the struggle continues. And so when we had our discussions, our robust discussions were made to also believe very strongly that we had to interact with others in the unity movement, in the ANC, in the PAC, towards understanding the intersectionality of our struggle. We operated at a time when being in the struggle was not for any financial recognition or reward. It was actually risky. Risk of being arrested, banned, killed, expelled from school, isolated, and so on. But it was answering a higher call. I look back with appreciation on the sense of mutual care and support we developed at Leopold Street. For example, my last paragraph. I arrived in a context where if any of the activists was banned, all of us had to contribute towards making sure that the family ate. So the little we earned, we shared. None of us could sleep without eating. Of course, we always say to Nzigi, we thank Mam Qete for the food we finished at the home in Ginsberg. Because we overextended this kindness and communalism, as we called it, in that there was always good bread that made us feel at home. When Mohapi and Biko died, some of us believed we owed it to them to take the baton and go on. I end by reflecting that some of the people at the time believed we were crazy. We ask, we were not crazy. We also hope that there will be people today that we can say they are crazy because there is a lot to do. Those were the days we enjoyed ourselves. Painful, but fun. Thank you.
Self-reliance. Ask not what your country will do for you. Ask what you can do for your community. You have set a great standard, exactly 11 minutes. I forgave you because I didn't give you the orders that when you come in, the VC had greeted everybody, you just come and talk. No salutation. Now we will be coming to Professor Harry Nengwe Kulu. Let's put our hands together.
Thank you very much. I want to talk what is never known. Perhaps a few people about Steve Biko, even Black Consciousness Movement. The starting point that when we formed SASO, there was no Black Consciousness Movement. But at the starting point that I was at the University College of the North, which is now University of Limpopo. Steve Biko was at the University of Natal, now University of KwaZulu-Natal, which was called the non-white section, which the student recall called the black section, which is a medical side. And Pichana was at Fort Hare, and Fort Hare had no SRC. Sterling Moodley was at Durban Westville. And there was Variava, who was in Transvaal College of Education, which is in Indian. I was in Limpopo together with Judge Musi, who was the judge president of the Free State, he just retired. We were first year, and at the time, the dominant thinking was to join a liberal white organization that was National Union of Southern Students. But we felt, I came from a student, this high school that we highly politicized. We did not understand why we should form, we should join a white organization. The first meeting that I attended, the first 2 weeks in the university, was the debate about that, you know. We then tried to investigate the two African students that had been formed by the PAC and ANC at Fort Hare. But we had no basis of finding information. We found one advocate, the late advocate Kutumela. He then gave us some information, but unfortunately, he got murdered before we could get in details. While Steve was following the same type of thing at the University of Natal, we had not even met. Pichana was the same thing that we're doing there. The first time that we began to think about real reform of the student organization was Stadtheim and Western Cape. That was the result of the problem that we had at Rose. When we went to the UNISA, we stayed at white areas, which was risky. So when we were at Rose, we then asked white students that this time we go and sleep at the location. And then they raised the issue of police, but we said we're taking the risk. At Stadtheim, we were talking under the auspices of the University Christian Movement, which was on the left-wing organization. We then decided that we must form not a black student organization. At the time, said a non-white student organization. We went to Marion Hill at St. Patrick's College. It was a Catholic college, and the Catholic Church was amenable to the struggle. We also had a big problem. There were among us those who felt that, mind you, it was just after the burning of the AS and PAC that, and above the ground student movement was risky, we won't survive. And that those who felt that we should go underground. But Steve and some of us felt that underground we can't mobilize very effectively. There are already organizations that are underground. So why would we join them? Ultimately, we won the day. But we knew that we were not going to survive for a long time. So we give ourselves a 5-year time frame that within 5 years, we must have mobilized the country to a certain extent that the regime cannot change. The second thing that Steve provided, which we talked about, was that we were going to focus on dismantling the white leadership of liberals, because we felt that they're the ones who take away the direction of the struggle from black people, which Steve had said in his book, they determine how you should react to the kick, but they said don't kick back. So we decided that the focus that we were going to have, at the dominant university campuses were the University of the North. I was the SRC president there. Transvaal College of Education was Variava was effective. And then in Durban, Steve was not a member of the SRC, but he had a group including people like Gula Ibrahim, he's a medical doctor in Boksburg. At Forte, Bichana operated within a group because Forte had abolished an SRC because the belief was that they were not a tribal university. They were formed in 1916. I don't want to argue about that. We also had a student who came to the theological college. So we formed SASU. And the first president of the Southwest Student Organization was Steve Biko. Mind you, we had resistance from black students today, and then we had non-white students within our campuses. Even at tough law with difficult people who felt that we should join the type of thing that perhaps today is seemed to resurfacing. That people think that you are better if your child attends the modesty school where they speak English almost like the Queen. It's confused as part of intelligence. So that is that we have. So we had a problem, even at we have. So Steve had a big problem. He was a very good organizer. He had to move across the country. But we had no money that we had. Our first constitution talked about non-whites. And the other important point that we had, it had a provision to admit whites. One reason was that from the beginning, we felt that we wanted to be a movement of Southern Africa. And we felt that in the then University of Honorary Doctorate in Swaziland had whites, so we should accommodate. But our strategy was that we must first be united before we can open the gates. So the first constitution did not have that. It was only in 1971 when we began to debate the issue that we were not non-wise, because you can't call a donkey a non-horse. A donkey is a donkey. So it's not a non-horse. So that was our objection. But we also had a big problem. We could not call an African Union, student association, because we had Indians and the so-called colors among us. So we devised a new definition, which today many people take for granted. Black people in South Africa call themselves black only from 1971. So it did not only be there, only from 1971. It did not exist. So we define blackness in terms of the common socio-economic and political conditions, not in terms of color. The other important thing that we battled with, which Steve handled very well, there were those within the organization who felt that we should never allow black people to have a relationship with whites, a white girlfriend or white boyfriend. And this view, which also we supported, was that we were not legislating for individuals. Individuals decide on themselves, but we're not fighting individual or fighting a system that we had. So from the beginning, that was that. Part of the problem that Steve faced was at the University of Zululand. He went there with Pichana in the late, Vuya Mashalaba. Our strategy from the beginning was that we were not going to criticize Chief Buthelezi, because on the surface, it looked very powerful. We had no problem with the Matanzima and Pepu and so on. They were known to be sellouts. So we decided to attack the system rather than individual. So when Steve went to University of Zululand, he attacked, Buthelezi, and the reaction was very negative. And then it was translated into, the attack of Zulu by Xhosa. Whereas, from our viewpoint, was that, Matanzima was really known as a sellout, so there was no point in wasting time. That affected the penetration of the University of Zululand. We were to play tribal politics. I was the one who was supposed to go there because they belonged to a small group, very significant, no threat to another tribal group. That was the logic that we had. So Steve organized from the beginning when there was absolutely nothing. We battled the issue of attacking liberals, which did not make sense to many people. But the logic was that we have. We also had a very strategic, which was mentioned here, position. We knew that leadership has to be trained. So formation schools were training grounds. Actually, when we were banned in 1973, we were in PE and we were going for training in a workshop that way. So we had a system in which we had 6 levels of leadership. Most of them did not know. We used to conduct mock elections. And secondly, we're democratic, but we never allow candidates to mushroom in a conference, except one instance I will mention. We used to canvass and decide who should be there. So me and Pichana were identified to be full-time. I live with Steve, Pichana, and Steve in the same house. We were supported by Nziki, because his wife, she was working at Edward, and Dimza, Pichana, at McCord. We were not working, we had no money, so we live on the, we'll say, Mundazane. So we didn't have, not Mundazane, we had no money, we never worked. There was no money. We operated. When we were full-time with Pichana, the budget that we found was 70 rand. That was the salary of a PA. We didn't have any money, but we needed to organize them. So in the 71 election, we made a big mistake. Initially, it was identified me, I would be organizer, Pichana, Secretary General, Trini Mood lead director. The president was going to Ruben Philip with the Anglican bishop in Wentworth, in Durban. But the day before the election, he said no, he had just been appointed a dean. He should actually be the deputy president, so we had nobody. At the time, Pichana was not the president, but Steve never ceased to be a member, because we had a group that we called itself a brother bond. We determined who would be in the leadership because we did not want to be infiltrated, except this one particular point. You know, Pichana met somebody, a Teflop, who was very articulate. He belonged to the generation, I think, of the Kota and to heaven, and the others in Robin Kwena. He invited him to Durban. At the conference, spoke very well. I make this individual make the SRC office. I then asked him, you know, would you want to be president? Because the honorary position, he said, yes. I talked to Pijan, who agreed. But when he talked to Steve, Steve said, no, but we don't even know this chap at all. We did not know him. No, I remember we debated that issue from Durban to Joburg when he was going to Joburg. Yeah. But because the manner in which we operated, we were a team, he agreed that we would have that was unhappy. This chap was elected at the conference and was asked to move around the province. The normal thing that we did, we told him, because he didn't know anything about the Synod organization. He had never been there before. He was older than us. He had going to university. But I remember I went to Durban in town to buy. When I pick up the Daily News, I saw this front page, a very violent attack on Buthelezi. I immediately went back to the office. We had to change our strategy. He was interviewed by Donald Woods, with the media misrepresented Steve Biko, his friend. He was one of the most vicious critics of the Black conscience movement because we were taking liberals. Even when he came to exile, he had told the British High Commissioner that he knew me very well. So when they came to fetch me by vehicle, I told them, no, you must have another black person. He knew me by name. You couldn't identify me. He didn't know me. So that's how we approached Steve. Steve remained part and parcel of what we have. We had a big support from Mr. Kwapa. When we started Pichana, we had no experience. We had perhaps good ideas, but no managerial skills. I remember the first project that we designed were almost half the size of the Bible. So we went to Ben, he was a social worker in Durban. He says, no, you must have executive summary. You can't do it this way. So that way, no. So that's how I operate. But within the office, Steve was very tactful. We classified ourselves. If we wanted, somebody came to the office, was white whom we did not want to talk, we referred him or her to Strini Moodley. We use very vicious language in criticizing. Steve, you would rush the person to him with what you think is a very serious position problem. You said, oh, sit down, He was never ruffled by anything. I remember one time one white lady, she's a dean at the University of Cape Town. She came to us and said, I support you, I want the struggle. So Steve said, no, come tomorrow. We'll give you an assignment. So when she came the following day, he said, we've got a white family that is really bothering us a great deal. So we'll give a gun. We want to go and wipe that family. She never came back. She never came back. One of the things that we regretted, we realized that Steve was a thinker, but we exposed him to the public at the beginning because he was the spokesperson of the organization. He became known by the regime, every time. Whereas we thought, later on that perhaps should a backroom thinker to create ideas. There are lots of ideas that have never been published, that Steve generated. We had a system that we call infiltrative politics. Take over organizations like Boy Scouts, Wayfarers, and so on, without demolishing them. We became experts on literacy using Paul Ferreira because you couldn't go into the mines. They were protected. So we went in as experts on literacy. We knew also that black people are notoriously religious. So we had to participate and change their thinking. We developed black theology within the top of varsity. Steve was occasionally religious. When I see this picture here, it was taken here at Hammanskraal at St. Peter's College. I had gone with him. when he spoke about, the quest for humanity. That speech, that. So every time when I look at it, it reminds me of that because I was sitting behind him, next to him. Pichana had been Anglican. I've never believed in any religion, but I was very capable. But I had to learn to be able to know. Where the late standing Twasa, was very good. We transformed the Sermon on the Mountain to try to deal with the poor. She referred about projects. We ran projects. Initially, the idea was that to penetrate the black community. Because at the time, you see, it was not only the police who were the problem, it was also our parents. They arrested you. Participation in politics, they will remind you that you end up robbing and so will Mandela. So the police did not have to do anything. Your family will arrest you. You stay at home. It was a risky job in what you do. You couldn't talk politics. I remember in meetings, if you wanted to have sellouts, strike, you sat in the podium and you just mentioned ANC, PAC. Anybody who wrote down, we take them away because you couldn't write down the PAC because when you got out of ANC, the police will ask you to explain. You can't say I just wrote the name. It's risky. So those are some of the things that Steve helped develop that we have. I went to exile. I didn't even know that I was going to go to exile. I remember the day before I was reading a poem which a guy in Greece who had been deported to an island was reading a poem about escaping from prison. That poem was actually reproduced in the drum newspaper. Because I was banned, Steve Biko and others at Pichana's house in New Brighton. The last time I saw Steve was in the same jail when they killed. He left, he was the last to leave. I was given a ticket to go to Joburg. But even when I left, I didn't know. I just dreamt that somebody was knocking. And there was people who were knocking from, one was the driver from Alexander, the other one Northwest, that were going. But I left that poem also open on the table, escaping. So even in exile, we used to communicate. She knows she once visited, there's somebody sitting around here. Went to him then. We used to talk over the telephone, but because we had a code, they couldn't break that, But one time when I phoned, I talked to Nziki, and she said, no, at about 8 o'clock, that time I phoned Steve. She said he was asleep. So I knew it was a code that, he could not be sleeping. He was not in the house. So I never phoned him. I phoned the following day. Same thing that, I knew, and then I stopped phoning because I used to phone him, When he got arrested, there are differences that, some of us know why he actually was out so severely. Because when I went to exile, my job was to open up a discussion with the ANC, PAC, so that we have three movements. We had no problem with the ANC. But the ANC will ask you, which PAC do you want to unite with? Because there were divisions in the PAC. So one of the things that we wanted to have was to try to find an organization. There was a meeting that we were organizing with the OR Tambo. My main contact was the former President Biko. I used to stay with him in Lusaka. So we are going to one meeting, me and Pichana and OR. But for some reason, the regime was supposed to meet in Gaborone. But OR could not move from Lesotho. I think he had gone there. Then we decided to have Steve in exile temporarily. We actually looked for a Dutch organization that looked very conservative in Holland, but progressive, to invite him. And they agreed, Our suspicion is that there was somebody who was working within the University Exchange Fund, who was, who is alive now, who was a spy within, who got that information. Because, you see, most of the time, we used to communicate by codes. When they arrested Steve, this is the person who knew a great deal about Steve Biko's movement in the Western Cape. I got very surprised that we did not have whites in the organization. But I remember when I was in the Geneva, I phoned Pichana, I said, this guy is an informer. So Pichana said, you must just be racist. And it turned out to be so. When Steve was arrested, I think they was to try to find out, because he was going to come out and come back on this interview. We wanted him to get that type of patient. The idea was to have the discussion with what we have, you know. So for us, Steve Biko had been very important. The person that we actually appointed as president, again the advice of Steve, turned out to be informer. We had to expel him at a conference in 1973, you know, because of that what we have. You know. So for me, the people who always ask me, how will Steve react in today's South Africa? I think he react the way he had been reacting. The thinking was there. You know. I always tell people that, you know, don't understand Steve when he was 30. No, you're almost doing like what you want to understand when they say Jesus disappeared, he came at the age of 30, disappeared at the age of 32. Steve's political involvement started even before he was 15. So to understand, you know, what Steve Perez Pichana, you know, I was expelled from school, from primary school, secondary school, and the university. We have been involved. I was talking to a colleague of mine that people who want to understand Steve, he must understand not only his autobiography, but the environment within which he grew up. He expelled from Hilltown. Then you understand why he thought the way he thought. So for me, that's why I want to remind Steve that way. Thank you.
I told you that you'd get these nuggets. Now I invite Ambassador Mtintso for the very last one. Let's put our hands together.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I have to say to Somadoda just at the onset, I was timing her and I timed Togo. So he cannot victimize me, because I'll call it sexism if he then stops me from talking when he allowed him to talk so much. But actually, I should actually be, if I was a Christian, I would say kuqikiwe, which means it's all done. But because I'm not a Christian, I'll still repeat what they've said. I must first start by thanking those who have really kept the spirit of Biko and the alive, and with the banner of BCM. Probably what you should do, Nkonde, is to continue to organize roundtables where we can interact, talking about, is Black consciousness still relevant, or is it relevant today? I must congratulate Nziki for really bringing up such lovely persons as her children. But I must open by a smaller nyana TRC, which follows what Togo had said. And I'm saying this for all BCM activists of that time. Bakhona apintona sebegugila nibaboni kakuhle, but bakhona. They were 20 at that time, but now they're sort of older. So this is really to say, we really, in quotes, abused Nziki and her children. Because these young men, the mother and the young men, had, amongst other things, we chased the children out of their beds, because there were many of us and we didn't have beds. So our excuse was that I need go and sleep elsewhere. So they packed in small beds in their room. Togo has said we ate the bread, but in reality, when they were asleep, we even stole their scaftins, because we would arrive at night and then there would be this bread put for the children, but we took that. So we really apologize. That's why we have, this TRC. But we also kept them awake until the small hours of the morning, because we had the Goombas generally. We called them a Goomba general, which meant that we partied till the early hours of the morning. So we took the quality time of these children from their mother and from their father. We do apologize. But we are proud and happy that all of you grew up to be such good human beings. Good people are becoming a scarce commodity in our country. Steve was such a good person with a big, warm heart. As we say in Xhosa, ebengumntu, meaning he lived our values of Ubuntu. Now, Ubuntu cannot be directly translated to English because our African languages and words are rich and pregnant with meaning, reflecting our culture and values. So those who speak English and Kwazu translate Ubuntu. But some of the characteristics of Ubuntu are, amongst others, service, meaning putting the people, the needs of others and your country above your personal needs, not seeking status or personal material gain and gratification. Steve lived a life full of these characteristics. I've not named all of them. But what we can ask today is how many of us live this life of Ubuntu? But many of us do tend to shout from rooftops about embracing and live the life of Ubuntu. But judging by our lives and actions, we would be what the Xhosas again say, ayingomntu lonto. Directly translated, again English fails me here, she or he is not a human being. Do our children and grandchildren even know what Ubuntu is? How can they know and emulate this when we, unlike Steve and BCM, are not leading by example? More importantly, how do we inculcate this in our children? How can we as elders be an example? So I think that it has been covered, this thing of the home of Steve Biko around King Williamstown, and we're many, we created what was almost a commune, and we shared whatever we had as part of Ubuntu, this sharing and solidarity. To such an extent that my first car, which was a Beetle Volkswagen, was bought through Ikolegi of the commune. They all put money together to buy me a car because they'd made me work as a journalist for Daily Dispatch and I had to commute. But ANC still owes me today because that car has skipped the country together with me. Now, in our group, or under Steve, mediocrity was not tolerated, as sometimes we do these days, not only tolerate, but reward this. But during our time, it was neither tolerated nor rewarded. This mediocrity in our country has actually given racists to undermine us. We may actually be needing, again, the revival of BCM and its teachings, where we could not afford to be sloppy and perform lower than the expected. This is what the youth of today should do, excel in everything, because if as a black person, you don't excel, you are confirming what is usually said about us, being lazy and being nothing but baboons. So you've got to excel. We did that because we had to prove ourselves against a system and against the white people, not necessarily the white monopoly capital, but the white people. Now, Steve forced us to understand concepts and defend them and argue. One time I arrived in King Williamstown from Johannesburg, where it was my home, and I was telling everybody how proud I am because there's a bridge now which is called Mandela Bridge. It was not that then. And we're pushing whites along that bridge. Some of them were coming from Wits University, but we're pushing them out of the way so that we could walk, so that the white people could just walk on the road, not on the pavement. Now, when I was getting there and boasting about this very, very revolutionary act, he quietly asked me what this was all about. Dololo, he replied, because I thought I'd done everything. I demonstrated how militant I was. We then were forced to understand concepts instead of mouthing them, using slogans and taking action which we were unable to explain, never mind defend. Steve had this ability of listening to all of us and respected the collective and strived to reach consensus, even with those that were outside King Williamstown and those that had already gone into exile. He embraced other people's views in a way that we thought that we were quite intelligent and quite political. So we'd have this discussion until the middle of the night. And then when Steve summarizes or puts his own views, you actually feel that he has talked about what I said. Would say, yes, that was what I was saying. But in essence, he was really trying to make sense of our sometimes waffled and distorted arguments. Well, I must say that I was one of the best wafflers, and I still am. As young people, I think that this is the style of leadership that you must grow to be. Listen and respect the views of others. Embrace and act on them. Rather than saying that we're listening to our people have said, just listen properly and act. Steve sacrificed his security. Already it has been said that he lived under pending orders. But the way he did things, he was able to lead under those conditions as if it was what today we call living dangerously. How many of us today, young and old rather, would be able to sacrifice our comfort, never mind our security, to serving our country, expecting no material returns? More importantly, how can we instill these values to our youth? How can we return to being exemplary to do what we preach? This has already been said, but I've just got to repeat it. In solidarity with the people in Welcome Wood, which was a place where political prisoners were dumped after they were released, we organized ourselves as BCM and built them houses with our own hands and resources. But I must say that most of them were sort of skewed, sort of, but at least we had built the houses. It has already been said that Steve had a sharp intellect and a deeply analytical mind. But with his humility, he made many of us feel special, clever, and intelligent. In that way, it would be said today he was supportive and empowering. But at the same time, he was pushing us, helping us to always question and challenge what we thought was unjust. Togo has already referred to a situation where Donald Woods arrived in our commune in Zinyoka. And then Steve challenged him as to why there was no reporting about black people and black organization and everything. So Donald Woods then replied that it's because there were no black journalists. Upon which Steve just said, oh, we have journalists here. And just said, Tenjiwe and Mapetla are our best journalists. So the following day, we had to report in East London as journalists. But at that time, it was actually very good because we were empowered to do what we could not do if we're not under those conditions and circumstances. But amongst other things, we're creating, as Nengwankulu was saying here, everywhere it was black organization, black this, black that. Black. We were black and we're proud, and we're translating that into our actions. And of course, as Harry said, we didn't tolerate non-whites. And non-whites were those that we called black people, white people in black people's skins. Now, the community work has already been talked about, but what we have to ask our youth, why is it that our streets everywhere are so dirty, and yet there are young people living in those areas? Where is the black pride? You cannot expect us as the elderly to be cleaning the streets. At that time, we used to do that community work. Lastly, I just want to say that Steve Biko was a person of unity. As you can see, those Black Consciousness organizations, we were together. It didn't matter whether you were in UBJ or you were in BCP or BPC. There was the president of BPC here. All of us were together and cemented by Steve and understanding it was not unity for the sake of unity. We had unity around common values and around commitment, and we were committed to changing the lives of our people. Now, it is important to talk about this because it was for this unity, he was in search of this unity, that he died, because he went to Cape Town with Peter Jones to meet some of the leaders of the band organizations. Never mind that he ended up not meeting them, but that was the intent. So it's very important that young people do find the importance of unity, rally around a common cause, and commit to lift your country to higher levels. That it should be correctly on those higher levels. We have done our part. We may have some of our problems and we may be failing you, but we've done our part. So it's not for you to keep on mourning about us and what we're doing today, but it's for you to build your country. The future is yours, but you can't say the future you'll build it tomorrow. Build it now. You can't build it tomorrow. So I think we have to answer the question that was raised there. Answer the question by Lenin, what's to be done? And also rally around the call, Black people, you are on your own. Now, I must say that Steve was, of course, that charismatic giant. Not that he did not have his flaws. We are not going to talk about those today. He loved life and enjoyed it and made us love life. Otherwise, he was asking us, how are you going to fight and defend people when you don't even love life? You've got to love life. And this then brought us to the Goombas. But there was one place that we loved. It was called Sisketi's Shipping. And those who drank and those who didn't drink, we always be there around Steve. And the point is that he was protected by the community. He could have been arrested by the community. When the police came, immediately he was hidden. So the police would just find us dancing. And we used, of course, at that time, you would not know, you young people, we used to do bump as if it was the end of the world. And we were dancing and singing to Nina Simone's song, To Be Young, Gifted and Black. And that was us. And of course, many, many freedom songs. And Steve could sing. And because we loved Steve and we had to be like him, we also were singing, and I was one of those who was always out of tune. Whether it was a revolutionary song or always out of tune. So I just want to say, much as Togo has already said, these were difficult times, but we were able to balance between our struggle and what we had to do and having fun. And I hope that the children of today, the youth of today, don't over-focus on the fun. Because if you do, you'll not be able to really pick up the spear of Steve Biko and continue to liberate our country. Thank you very much.
Wow.